Hey everyone, welcome back to part 2 of this explainer. If you caught part 1, you probably remember that major light bulb moment that completely flips how we look at our screen time. We established that dopamine is not the brain's pleasure chemical, even though popular culture says it is all the time. Instead, it's the architect of desire. It's your brain's primary motivation system, basically a neurochemical survival engine that evolved to make us pay attention to things that keep us alive. But today, we're looking at what happens when that ancient biological system crashes headfirst into modern technology. And the thesis here is fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying. Because tech platforms didn't accidentally cause this massive distraction crisis we're all feeling. No, they weaponized our evolutionary biology.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this is where the neuroscience gets absolutely incredible. You really have to ask, how does a simple pane of glass and aluminum completely override millions of years of survival instincts? Well, the truth is, modern social media platforms didn't create human addiction, not at all. Instead, they mapped the human brain. They learned exactly how to exploit the biological pathways that were already sitting right there in our heads. They essentially found the cheat codes to the mammalian mind, and they figured out how to turn our deepest, oldest survival instincts into this perfectly tuned engine for endless engagement.
So to understand how they actually pulled this off, we have to look at something called reward prediction error, or RPE. This right here is the absolute secret sauce behind platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube Shorts, you name it. See, your brain releases dopamine not just when you get a reward, but specifically when a reward is unexpected. If you open up an app and suddenly see a genuinely hilarious or captivating video that you totally didn't see coming, your brain registers this massive positive prediction error. The result? A huge spike of dopamine. And this physical reaction biologically reinforces your behavior. It literally whispers to your brain, hey, whatever you just did to get that, do it again. And look, this isn't happening by chance. It's the result of highly engineered features that are meticulously designed to capture your raw, involuntary attention. Think about the infinite scroll for a second. In the natural world, pretty much everything has a stopping cue, right? A book has a final page. A conversation wraps up. A meal is over when your plate is empty. But the infinite scroll deliberately removes those natural stopping cues. It leaves your brain endlessly searching for the bottom of a bottomless plate. Add in autoplay, algorithms that are ruthlessly optimizing for your watch time down to the literal millisecond, the intense FOMO from disappearing stories, and the gamification of your actual friendships through streaks. Every single one of these features removes friction, replacing it with an endless high-reward stream.
Which brings us to a really foundational concept in behavioral psychology, B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. Skinner famously showed that animals in a box would press a lever obsessively, sometimes literally, until they died of exhaustion, if the reward they received was unpredictable. And today? Well, the smartphone in your pocket is basically a beautifully designed, glowing Skinner box. Every single time you swipe down to refresh your feed, you are pulling the lever of a digital slot machine. You have absolutely no idea if the next post is going to be incredibly exciting, deeply emotional, or just totally boring.
The scientific term for this slot machine effect is variable ratio reinforcement. And guys, it is the strongest, most resilient form of psychological habit formation known to science. Think about it. If every single video on your feed was a perfect 10 out of 10, your brain would actually get used to it. You'd habituate. You would get bored. The algorithm absolutely knows this. So it deliberately feeds you this unpredictable mediocrity mixed in with absolute perfection. It's the scarcity and the unpredictability of that one perfect video that keeps your brain in a state of high arousal, just constantly hunting for that next hit.
And this brilliantly illustrates the cue, routine, reward loop that drives our automatic behaviors. Your phone buzzes, or maybe you just feel a tiny, brief moment of boredom. That's the cue. Without even consciously thinking about it, your habit circuits just take over and you unlock your phone. That's the routine. Then boom, you see a new notification or an endless stream of novelty, and that's the reward. Over time, thanks to those Pavlovian notification bells and little red badges, this loop becomes so deeply strengthened that checking your phone becomes an entirely automated habit. You aren't even deciding to do it anymore. Your brain is just executing the program. Have you ever found yourself scrolling for 2 hours, feeling absolutely miserable, yet somehow completely unable to stop? Well, Dr. Kent Berridge's pioneering neuroscience research explains exactly why this happens. His work reveals that the feeling of wanting something and the feeling of actually liking it are controlled by entirely separate systems in the brain. Dopamine controls the wanting, that deep, relentless drive to seek out a reward. Meanwhile, opioid and cannabinoid receptors control the liking, the actual feeling of pleasure. Social media violently overstimulates the dopamine system, meaning you can be biologically driven to desperately want to keep scrolling, even when you no longer actually like the experience.
But we need to take a step back because this goes way beyond behavioral habits. We are talking about actual structural changes to the brain itself. The brain operates on neuroplasticity, which is famously summarized by the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. Your brain is continuously remodeling itself based on repeated experiences. So the really big question is, what happens to your biological hardware when it's subjected to a constant, high-amplitude flood of unpredictable digital rewards for hours a day, year after year?
So the crucial point here is a biological process called receptor downregulation. When your brain is continuously flooded with these massive dopamine surges from endless scrolling, it gets totally overwhelmed. To protect its neural circuits from this massive, completely unnatural flood of stimulation, the brain physically removes or hides its own dopamine receptors. And this shifts your baseline reward threshold. Suddenly you're in a reward deficit. Because you literally have fewer receptors available, you now need more scrolling, more extreme content, and more time on the app just to feel a normal baseline level of motivation.
And this isn't just a theory. We can quite literally see it on brain scans. Advanced MRI imaging studies from 2020 show that individuals with problematic smartphone use exhibit structural neuroadaptations that look remarkably similar to other forms of chemical dependency. Specifically, researchers observed significant reductions in gray matter volume in the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. Now, the ACC is basically your brain's impulse control center. It's the exact part responsible for conflict resolution and saying no to cravings, so the very hardware required to put the phone down is structurally losing its capacity to do so.
This biological shift completely changes how we interact with the real world. Think about the massive difference between instant and delayed gratification. Social media provides an incredibly high-amplitude dopamine hit with zero physical or cognitive effort. You just move your thumb. But ordinary activities, actually doing homework, reading a physical book, exercising, or just sitting quietly with your family, those require sustained mental effort, and they only offer low-amplitude rewards. Because your brain's baseline has been artificially jacked up by screen time, these incredibly important, slower-paced activities suddenly feel agonizingly understimulating. You struggle to focus because your brain is practically screaming that reading a textbook just isn't providing enough novelty to be worth the effort.
And the real-world consequence of this cognitive shift is honestly staggering. Dr. Gloria Mark, an informatics researcher at UC Irvine, has been measuring human attention spans in digital environments for decades, using actual computer logging and sensor arrays. Back in 2004, the average time a person could sustain focus on a single screen before switching tasks was 2.5 minutes. Today, that number has plummeted to just 47 seconds. Let that sink in. Our capacity to hold a single uninterrupted thought is just crumbling under the weight of these engineered digital environments. Now, a logical response to all of this might be, well, just put your phone on silent. If you don't look at it, it won't distract you, right? It's this super common assumption that sheer willpower can override a buzzing piece of plastic. But what happens when researchers actually test that assumption in a lab? Does ignoring a notification actually protect your focus? Or does the mere attempt to ignore it extract a hidden cognitive cost?
Well, the data is alarming. In studies utilizing the Sustained Attention to Response task, or SART, researchers test how well people can maintain focus under pressure. And they found that just hearing a notification ping, or even feeling a silent vibration, even if the user never touches or looks at their phone, triggers a massive cascade of task-irrelevant thoughts. The probability of making a careless mistake increases by 300% just from a passive alert. The distraction hits your brain the absolute split second the sound reaches your ear. It completely bypasses your willpower.
But wait, the damage doesn't stop when the notification ends. Dr. Sophie Leroy introduced a vital concept called attention residue. See, when you switch your focus from an incomplete task, like studying for a math exam, to check a digital interruption, your brain does not switch cleanly. A substantial portion of your working memory remains completely anchored to the previous task. And the really incredible finding here is that it takes the brain an average of over 23 minutes to fully recover its deep focus after shifting away from a single digital interruption.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the math. Just put those two numbers together. Notifications interrupt the average student roughly every 2 minutes. Yet it takes 23 minutes of uninterrupted time for the brain to cognitively recover and enter a state of deep work. If your phone buzzes every 5 or 10 minutes, you are mathematically prevented from ever reaching your full cognitive capacity. You exist in this permanent state of chronic, unresolved fragmentation. You might feel like you're studying, but biologically speaking, you are skimming the absolute surface of your intelligence.
And it gets even deeper. A landmark 2017 study by Dr. Adrian Ward investigated a phenomenon known as brain drain. They tested hundreds of students' available working memory and fluid intelligence, basing it entirely on the physical proximity of their smartphones. Now get this, the phones were turned off and placed face down. Yet the students whose phones were just sitting on the desk performed the absolute worst. Those with phones hidden in their pockets did slightly better. But the highest cognitive performance, by far, belonged to the students whose phones were physically located in a totally different room.
The reason for this is as profound as it is simple. The smartphone represents an infinite portal of hyper-salient social and hedonic rewards. When it's anywhere in your visual or spatial field, your prefrontal cortex has to actively recruit executive resources just to inhibit the automatic urge to grab it. You are burning finite cognitive fuel just trying not to check your device. And that is fuel that's no longer available for logical reasoning, for memory encoding, or for deep comprehension. Literally, the mere physical presence of the device drains your intellect.
So we've seen how these platforms map our biology, how they exploit our dopamine systems, alter our neuroplasticity, and completely drain our working memory. At first, social media only changed what we did. Then it changed what we wanted. Eventually, it began changing how our brain decides what deserves attention. And if attention is the absolute foundation of learning, memory, and intelligence, what happens when attention itself begins to change? In Part 3, we'll uncover why studying feels harder than ever, why reading books has become exhausting, and why our ability to focus is quietly disappearing.